Kelsey. This is my booktube channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing my fancy booktube hat, and today is the last day of July, and I decided that I was just gonna go ahead and put up, film today and get up as soon as I can, a monthly recommendations video for the month of July. Monthly Recommendations is a Goodreads group created by Trina from Between Chapters and Kayla Rain. I'll link the group for you down below. Now, there are a couple different reasons why I almost missed this month's monthly recommendations. The first of which is the fact that Booktube-A-Thon happened, and that meant that I was already posting more videos this month than I normally would in a month, so there just wasn't time and energy for it. And secondly, because this month's theme is really sort of intimidatingly large for me in a way that I've been grappling with and not quite sure how to turn that into a list of recommendations. And this month's theme is empowering female leads. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Kelsey, half the books that you read have empowering female leads. That's part of the issue that I'm having here. And it is true that I think the majority of the books I read, probably over half the books I read, have female protagonists, and they are in some way strong characters. So on the one hand, there's this wealth of everything that I've read with female protagonists and how do I choose. On the other hand, and I don't know if this was the intention of the group's creators when they gave us this theme or not, the word used for the topic is empowering. Not strong, not powerful, not empowered, but empowering. So what does that really mean? Well, to me, that means that an empowering female lead in a book means that that character's story, that girl or woman's story, has to somehow empower the reader or empower society. It has to transcend the actual story itself and empower someone else. And when I started thinking about this topic in those terms, it became a whole lot more challenging. I can give you a couple examples of books that are extremely well known that I think have had an empowering effect on women in society simply because of how many people they've spoken to. For example, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte was published in the 19th century, and since then it has been beloved by generations upon generations of women. Why? Because I think in the intervening history between the time this was published and today, women have found empowerment in the idea of a protagonist who demands to be recognized not for her looks or for her social status, but for her intellect and her mind. And I think that the sheer number of women that this book has spoken to in the intervening years between the time it was published and now makes it a historically empowering text. A newer book that I think is having a huge impact right now in terms of broadening the viability of female protagonists in popular stories is The Hunger Games. I am not myself a die-hard fan of The Hunger Games, but I am fascinated by the effect that its popularity is having on our society. I see that the popularity of these books has spawned a whole slew of young adult sci-fi and fantasy trilogies with female rebel teenager protagonists. And I see the success of the film franchise as something that when the history of women in the media gets told is going to be acknowledged as a franchise that changed what is considered commercially viable for female characters as protagonists of sci-fi action type film franchises. I don't know how accurate my theory really is that The Hunger Games is just changing everything, but I do see a lot of female-centric stories arising in its wake, and I feel like this was a catalyst. I see these books and these movies as something that has indisputably proven that this type of story can be commercially viable with a female lead. And I think that it's interesting to note that in my family, at least, the person who is the biggest Hunger Games fan is my dad. My dad is a middle-aged man. And that's exciting for me as a woman to see how many guys I know are really pumped about a story about a girl. But you did not need me to recommend either of these books to you. You already know all about both of these books, even if you haven't read them. So if I only talk about the books that are only empowering because everyone knows them, then I'm failing as a book recommender, right? So here's where this video is just gonna lose all its structure and become a little mushy and rambly. I somehow always end up talking about Robin McKinley in monthly recommendation videos, so I figured why not? I recently, for Booktube-A-Thon, reread The Blue Sword earlier this year. I reread The Hero and the Crown. These are two of her earliest books. They are a duology that can be read in either order. The Hero and the Crown is a prequel to The Blue Sword, so this is publication order and this is chronological order. These are fantasy novels from the 80s, and I consider them to be empowering female stories because they both feature female characters in fantasy roles that are traditionally male roles. The Hero and the Crown is about Lady Eyre, a legendary dragon-slaying hero, and The Blue Sword is about a girl who goes by the name of Harry, whose destiny, it turns out, is to carry Lady Eyre's legendary magical sword Gaunteron, which can only be wielded by a woman. So woman as legendary heroic fantasy world savior, that's one way to go. On the other hand, something like Deerskin, this is a book that I talked about in my survival stories monthly recommendations and did kind of a full review of in that video, so I'll link that for you. This is a very different kind of empowering female lead by the same author. This features what I think would be considered a more traditionally feminine story arc about a woman recovering from abuse. And another thing that I was thinking about, because I read a good deal of books for younger readers this month for Booktube-A-Thon, is that one way that a story about a female person can be particularly empowering to women is to write it for and market it to younger girls. I feel personally incredibly lucky that I was able to grow up at a time and in a social, cultural environment where from a young age, stories about cool girls doing cool things was always available to me, and I know that that hasn't been true historically and probably isn't true for a lot of people even today. So I count myself incredibly lucky to have been raised on stories about strong female protagonists. It means that I get, in some ways, to take these stories for granted. Take, for example, fairy tale retellings. If you watch my channel, you know that I love fairy tale retellings and I read them all the time. In fact, I have always read fairy tale retellings. One of the coolest things about fairy tales, one of the things that I love most about them, is that they are a sort of fluid tradition with stories that are told and retold over and over again and change with the times. So there is, for example, the idea of a traditional princess waiting to be rescued. But there has also, in recent decades, been such a strong counter-movement of plucky princesses doing their own thing and getting stuff done for themselves, that I, as someone who was raised on books like, oh, say, Ella Enchanted, can see that sort of story arc as something that is common enough that it's no longer totally exceptional in and of itself, but acknowledge that it's really significant that that has become part of what fairy tales mean to me. More recently, I picked up Patricia C. Reedy's Enchanted Forest Chronicles. I've read the first two so far. These are more books like that that I want to recommend, in part because I didn't read them as a kid. I didn't even know these books existed, but I totally would have loved them, and I'm kind of pissed at myself that I didn't know that they were there, so here they are. Moving away from plucky princesses to plucky not princesses, because believe it or not, not all of us are princesses. Another series that I read, at least I read the first 2 books of these when I was a kid, were Terry Pratchett's Tiffany Aching books. This is the We Free Men. This is the first one. Tiffany gets older over the course of the series, but she's pretty young in this, and I would consider this a middle grade book. First of all, I'm totally due for a reread on these books, and it'll be happening soon. But this is about a girl named Tiffany Aching, who is a witch. And as Publishers Weekly says on the back, what's not to love about a girl who takes on vicious monsters armed only with a frying pan? Ha! Indeed. But I love the witches in Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. And Tiffany Aching is a protagonist very much in the spirit of the grown-up Discworld witches, but aimed at younger readers. And I think, I remember these books being fabulous when I read them when I was younger, and I cannot wait to reread them. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you'll take it as less of a list of books I recommend, and as more of a discussion about the things that can make a story about a female character empowering to a large number of people. If you can help me muddle through this topic in my mind, I would love to hear from you. Please talk to me in the comments. That is all. I have to get it up by midnight because at midnight it starts being August, and there's a new topic for August, and it will no longer be July. So here we go. Okay, bye for now.